Hello, today I'm going to talk about public opinion, voter behavior, and political parties. I'm going to start off by talking about how we get our political beliefs, how we form our political beliefs. And that is called political socialization, how we socialize politically. And the number one factor in political socialization is our family. Our family has the biggest influence on what we believe, how we think politically, followed by school, the media, our religious beliefs, our socioeconomic status, etc. Now, when we look at the United States, we see a melting pot and a mix of cultures and ideas. So we have a lot of different ideas floating out there. Some people we agree with, some people we disagree with. Soon, in the United States, we will have what's considered a minority majority, meaning there will not be a majority. There will not be one race that compromises 50% or more. So, and that's going to happen somewhere around 2050, and all races will be less than 50%. So there will be no majority, also known as a minority majority. Now, as we change, and as people move around, and as I stated earlier, as we become minority majority, eventually, or not eventually, every 10 years, we have to see what the makeup of the United States is. So we do a thing called a census. Now, you may have seen one, and if not, you will see one eventually. A census is where you answer a bunch of questions, and it basically shows, what percentage of Americans make what percentage of money, what percentage of Americans are white or black or any other race, what percentage of Americans have high school, college, or other areas of schooling, maybe didn't graduate from school, but that's what a census measures. Now, it also measures how many people are in a particular area. If you, for instance, have 1 million people move out of the state of Indiana after the census, a reapportionment happens. And that what happens there is, as people move in and out of states, the number of houses, because remember, the House of Representatives is based on population, the number of House members changes. So currently, Indiana has 9. Now, that could change. As it changes, you've got to redraw, you've got to change the number first, and then you've got to redraw these lines. Now, state legislatures are the ones in charge of redrawing or redistricting the lines. You will do that even if you don't gain or lose seats, because people do move around, and you need to have about the same number of people in all areas. You can't have District 1 be 300,000 and District 2 be 1.5 million. So they're going to have to redraw these lines, which is done by state legislatures. Now, when they do that, you do risk gerrymandering. And gerrymandering is where you redraw these lines to favor one political party over another. And since the party in control has a lot of power in how these lines are drawn, they can make it so that they can keep power for longer. And when they do that, when they're drawing the lines to benefit themselves, or redrawing lines in a biased manner, that is called gerrymandering. So how can we tell what people think? So we're going to change gears here for a second. You do that with polls. You only need 1,500 to 2,000 people. It's just like soup. If you stir it up and put your spoon in and try the soup, it's going to taste the same. Now, you do have to stir it up, so it has to be random. You can't call 1,500 to 2,000 college students and ask a question, or call 1,500 to 2,000 senior citizens and ask them a question, because that's not random. It has to be completely random sampling, where every individual has exactly the same chance of being selected. And if you do that with 1,500 to 2,000 people, you can have a good idea of what people are thinking. All right, moving on. So the art of asking questions is also important. When you ask people questions, you've got to think in lines of, does the question have bias? You need to consider the wording, because you can ask a question to have a type of bias to get people to say one thing or another. There's usually a margin of error known as sampling error, plus or minus 3%. And then exit polls. This is used on election day to predict electoral winners with speed and precision. Based on polling, we can exit poll and see who's winning what states. But the media does have to be careful to not impact voter turnout because of exit polls, especially because of time changes. The media, 6 o'clock news in Indiana might be reporting something, whereas in California, it's still 3 p.m. and people are still voting. So, all right, who is liberal and who is conservative? When we look at different factors, if we look at age, for instance, the older you are, the more likely you are to be conservative. The younger you are, the more likely you are to be liberal. Religion, Protestants tend to be more conservative. Catholics and Jewish tend to be more liberal. White people tend to be more conservative. Minority people tend to be more liberal. Males tend to be more conservative, and females tend to be more liberal. Education, lesser degree, you tend to be more liberal. A higher degree, you tend to be less liberal. That's obviously not always the case. If you look at Warren Buffett, for instance, he's older, 70s or 80s. He's Protestant. He's white, and he's male, which would say conservative, 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 conservative. But nevertheless, he is tends to be more liberal. If you look at Condoleezza Rice, she's younger, youngerish. I think she is Protestant. She's minority. She's a female. She tends to be more conservative. So that's definitely not a blanket statement for everyone. That tends to be the trend. Voter registration. Voter registration is used to prevent voter fraud. By federal law, no state can stop registration more than 30 days before a federal election. The Motor Voter Bill makes it so that when you get your driver's license, you can register to vote. Now, you do have to be 18 to register to vote, but when you renew your driver's license, you can register to vote. So if you happen to get it when you're younger than 18. This has increased registration. There are more people that are registered to vote, but it hasn't necessarily increased voter turnout. And we'll talk about why people don't turn out to vote in a minute. All right, next, why don't people turn out to vote? Well, when do people vote? They tend to vote more in presidential elections than primary or midterm elections. People vote more in national elections than local elections. So if you have presidential candidates, so if you have Trump and Clinton running against each other, people are more likely to vote in that. But if it's a midterm election between voting for president, that's less likely to garner people's attention and less likely that people will turn out to vote, which makes your vote an even bigger vote, because when there's less people, each vote does count for even more. So if you have 100 million people voting, then it still counts because every vote counts. But that's not going to have the same effect as if you're voting and 3 people vote. So remember that. Vote in local elections. Actually, vote in all elections. Why don't people vote? Because they have difficulty in registering and knowing where to go to vote. The internet has helped that tremendously, but people still have an issue. People don't care. They're lazy. They don't want to be inconvenienced. The weather's bad. They have childcare. They don't like anybody on there. They just don't want to vote. They think their vote doesn't even count. They feel like it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. That means they don't have any political efficacy. If you think your vote does count, you think that your vote makes a big difference, then you have a high level of political efficacy. And finally, they just don't see it as a civic duty. So who does vote? Who's likely to go to the polls and vote? The higher level of education you have, the more likely you are to vote. The more money you make, the more likely you are to vote. White people turn out to vote more than minority people. Women turn out to vote more than men do. And older people turn out to vote. The 26th Amendment, which actually lowered the voting age from 21 to 18, actually lowered turnout overall because 18 to 21-year-olds tend to not vote anyway, even though now they're counted as part of the population that can vote. They just don't vote for the reasons we mentioned earlier. How do we vote? Often the most important way is candidate appeal. We look at, do we like Trump? Do we like Hillary Clinton? And that kind of affects whether or not we vote and who we vote for. Party identification, if we're Republican or Democrat, plays a big role. and issues. Although they're more retrospective than prospective, that means that we look at how they've dealt with it in the past. Have the Republicans given tax cuts in the past? Yes, so therefore we're going to vote Republican. Have Democrats been stronger on environmental regulations in the past? Yes, so therefore we're going to vote Democrat. It just depends on where you stand on those issues, but it's more retrospective than what they're going to do. All right, improvements in access to voting. So if we look at, I'm going to go through a couple of these here, some of the amendments. The 15th Amendment made it so that race could not be a factor in voting, although things like literacy tests, poll taxes actually made it so that it was still hard for African American males to vote. The 19th Amendment made it so that women can vote. The 23rd Amendment made it so DC residents, District of Columbia residents, could vote in federal elections. The 24th Amendment took away the poll taxes and literacy test that were introduced with the 15th Amendment, after the 15th Amendment passed to still stop African American males from voting. And then the 26th Amendment made it so that people younger than 21 could vote, 18-year-olds could vote. So who are we dealing with? Who actually, is interested in politics, gets to know politics, goes out and talks politics, and plays an active role? With only about 25% are attentive public. They're interested in politics. About 40%, close to half, they vote, usually in presidential elections, but politics just doesn't interest them that much. And then 35%, a third, just really aren't interested in politics. So, all right, now let's look at political parties. So, what are political parties? They are groups of people seeking to control government and advance their platform through winning elections. So the two major political parties are Republicans and Democrats. They want to control the House. They want to control the Senate. They want to control the presidency and the courts. That way they can advance their platform. And how do they control? They do this through winning elections. What are the functions of these parties? They pick candidates. So the Republican Party ended up picking Donald Trump. The Democratic Party ended up picking Hillary Clinton. They run campaigns. They give cues to voters so that voters can vote for the party's candidate. They articulate their policies so that people know what they want to do when they are running the government. And they coordinate policy making. So they organize government and coordinate things so that the party helps them proceed with the policy changes they want to make. All right, straight ticket versus split ticket voting. In straight ticket voting, now this is just during the general election. During the primaries, you're actually picking from one party or the other. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But straight ticket versus split ticket can only happen in the general election. If you're a straight ticket voter, you go in and you pull the lever, push the button for the Democrats or the Republicans, whatever the case may be, and then you're done. You might elect some, or vote for some judges, or depending on the situation, there's other things that could be on the ballot. But as far as party lines, you go in and you'll hit, for instance, Republican, and that votes the Republican governor, or Republican mayor, or Republican House member, Republican senator, or whatever happens to be on the ballot at that time. You're picking the Republicans out of that list. Now, in a straight ticket, a split ticket vote, that's completely different. You might pick a Republican mayor or a Republican president, and then you might pick a Democratic House member. So you might have picked Donald Trump, a Republican, for president, but you might have picked Andre Carson, a Democrat, to represent you in Congress. So you go down and you don't pick based on party, you pick based on the person and who appeals to you. That is considered split ticket. You're splitting your ticket between the parties. Okay, party organization. Parties are decentralized. There's a central organization for a party, but it does not control the local party branches. So it's different in different states. City politics were once dominated by party machines, where patronage was used to give jobs based on political ties and not merit. So you would get jobs, you would get different things based on your political ties, not based on how good of a job that you could do. I'm going to continue on the next slide, so make sure to click on the next one.